to another episode of This is the Man in the Middle podcast. This is exploring the world of cybersecurity through stories. And my special guest today, his name is Thomas Jreige.
How you doing?
Very good, very good. And he's from Shimazaki, I've already botched it, Shimazaki Risk Advisory. And my first question to you, Tom, welcome you. If you could explain what that is so I can move off from the embarrassment of mispronouncing it.
Well, there's no mispronunciation. Everyone has their own language and their own way of pronouncing it, so it's all good. So Shimazaki is an island cape in Japanese. So if you think about an island in turbulent water and being smashed by water, our organisation helps making a safer world through finding opportunity in turmoil and by doing risk assessments to help understand what have you got to lose and how can you achieve a better outcome for the business. And it's about taking that island, hit it with water. The resilience is the island comes back in maybe the same shape, but it's still there afterwards. It's just about in which manner does it want to exist after the turbulent water. So that's what we're about.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm always very fascinated with how people like come up with the names of their companies and their businesses. And like when I saw that, I'm like, there's definitely a story behind this, and I needed to ask you. But yeah, like, give us a sense of your background when it comes to cybersecurity more generally, but risk, because I think one of the things that as we've spoken over the years and more recently as well, Tom, is getting a sense that your forte is looking at risk from a very holistic point of view. So could you just give us a bit about? Love to hear how you got into this space to begin with. So if you could tell us how you did get into the world of risk and cybersecurity.
Yeah. So I've always been I wouldn't say a troublesome kid, but I was always a kid challenging authority and always trying to out of the box thinking when I was younger. So I would always try and find a way around something all the time. And in order to do that, you had to actively conduct risk assessments. As a child, you don't know you're actually doing that until later on somebody comes along and tells you you're conducting a risk assessment from the perspective of what's the consequence of your action, what's the probability you're actually going to achieve what you're going to do. So I've spent a lot of my life doing that. So doing things like Aikido and Kendo, there is risk around that of getting hit and understanding how to defend yourself and all that. And that moved into going to university, studying physics at university, enjoying things that explode and go boom and things that are dangerous, all that. And then going through a career of working with government, critical infrastructure, and various aspects of our wonderful industrial sectors and all that, understanding what makes and breaks a company, what have they got to lose, how are they going to lose it, and basically what is it going to cost the business if they lose something in it. And that's where the grounding of risk management came from. And then it's just moved along from there. So we do look at it from a very holistic perspective. We don't do auditing, we don't do compliance, because auditing and compliance is merely a check sheet, and it's already a human's mistake of starting to use a check sheet that someone's invented to say, here's a criteria. And while it's great, to do real risk analysis means you have to be the threat actor to the business. You have to be able to think like the real threat actor. So the key thing is modeling threat and understanding who the bad guy is. When you can do that, you can actually sit down and say, okay, if I am a bad guy, what am I going to do to the business? And do a structured walkthrough of the business, understand what's going wrong, provide a remediation plan, and then you move from there to fix things. And that's what we offer to business owners and also boards and also government departments and various other aspects within industry.
Yeah, okay. And just on that compliance piece, because you did mention that that's not what you do. Like, it is extending beyond that, and there's an issue with just focusing on that piece. And I remember when we were preparing for this, when we were speaking earlier, like, could you sort of explain that difference between you could technically be compliant, but you're potentially and effectively ignoring a lot of other factors? Could you kind of explain how that actually works in like a real case scenario, like generally speaking?
Absolutely. So for example, if you think about compliance, you've got a list of criteria you have to meet. So you've got the likes of Optus and Medibank who have compliance regimes for many different aspects of their business, including cybersecurity, IT, and all that. There's a list of criteria that says, for example, you need to have antivirus, you need to have password managers, etc. How did they determine they actually need a password manager and an antivirus in the first place? And that's where our assessment helps you determine that. Now, with that compliance, you can have that antivirus, but if you don't actually have a compliance measure where it says you need to run security updates on your antivirus, you need a human being to look at the logs and the events, etc., then you've only got half a measure in place. So if the compliance is not telling you and you're just purely going on a compliance measure, you've missed half the criteria for having an antivirus product. Where we look at it and we ask the question, okay, you have a machine, it's exposed. Do you have antivirus? Who's looking after it? What human is doing it? What events are they looking for? What is the actual real threat on that machine that an antivirus is going to go, hey, there's something going wrong? So that's how the difference between what we do and what compliance is. We're always asking the question and we keep digging until we get to the last question and there's nothing left to ask from that perspective, and then work backwards to provide the scenario.
Yeah, okay. And like, given your background in a lot of different industries, does that give you a certain level of perspective and, I guess I want to say, like, almost creativity, in the sense of you're able to look at coming into other different spheres and different industries as well, bring in your experience from different areas? Is that something you're able to do, Tom?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're working in a standard corporate office, the only real thing you've got to lose is intellectual property and money. If you're working in the mining sector and you can hack, for example, a health and safety system, people's lives are at risk. So there's a completely different context to the organization then. So how you approach risk is going to be very, very different. And then you have, for example, Department of Defense. Department of Defense is even more critical because they're looking after the national security for the country. So if they get compromised, the context is going to be different again. So they have layers upon layers of protection. Mining industry are very similar. So it depends on the context of the organization. And that's what, because we've got such a vast exposure to a lot of industries, we take the best of those and what is in context of what we're looking at the time. And we'll take the good and bad things, have a look at where things worked, where things didn't work. Hence the reason why we don't follow an audit process or even a standard, because standards will just dictate sequentially what you need to do. We like to think about, you need something because you really need it, which hence can then help with cost evaluation for the organization. Sometimes it will cost more than what the other process is, but you're afforded the right protection.
Yeah, okay. And I know, like, my understanding is that there's like 4 questions that you're always looking to ask, organizations and companies when you're first looking to work with them. Could you go through those questions for us and explain a little bit about why you ask those questions? Yeah.
So with any standard risk management process, there are 4 questions that we always ask, and it's very important that, and it's even when you're when you're driving a car or even riding a motorbike and things like that. It's basically, what have I got to lose? Who's going to hurt me? How are they going to do it, and why? And what is it going to cost? So if you think about those 4 aspects on every single thing you do, then you've got a good platform for risk management. Because if you don't know what it is initially, the other 3 are not going to even matter to you, because if you can't see the asset or whatever it is, you'll never be able to do proper risk management. So it's a sequence of those events that are always looking at, and what we're looking at all the time.
Yeah, okay. And what was it? How did you sort of arrive at those? I guess that criterion of discovering that and using that framework when you're working with organizations.
When I first started working with risk, even though I was still out of the box thinking and all that, I was still exposed to standards and all that. And looking at the standard, and notice that standards never talk about what have you got to lose. They always talk about what are you going to put in place to stop the bad guy from getting in. But they never talk about what have you actually really got to lose in the business. They don't talk about threat modeling in terms of who's going to do it. They sometimes talk about the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses of how they're going to get into the system. The threat modeling, I'll actually correct myself on that, is basically the who. Vulnerabilities are the how they're going to get in. They never talk about the cost, because the only entity that can tell you about cost is the business itself. So if you lose a patent in a business, only the business can tell you what it's worth when they lose that. So it's about those 4 criteria, and how we came about it is that if we don't ask these questions, then we're really just at the mercy of a standard. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure the business gets exactly what they need, and that's to be protected in a holistic way, which means breaking rules sometimes around that.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. I want to go back a little bit because you did explain how when you were younger, you were effectively, without knowing it, you were doing that risk assessment some sort of way. But like bringing it now to the present, Tom, what is it that you love most about what you do, and why you remain so passionate about this space?
I'm so passionate about it because it's evolving. Now, about me a little bit, I've got high adrenaline. I get bored easy. And the good thing about risk is it's never quiet and it's always something new. So you can do 100 businesses with the same standard and you'll just keep getting similar outcomes all the time. We're doing what we do and going on the hunt for what a business has really got to lose. It overcomes boredom very, very quickly because you've got a new story each time. And that's what I like about what I do. What I'm passionate about is actually developing a story about a business, understanding the people, the process, the technology in the business, how it's put together and how they achieve their outcomes and how we then become part of that process to help them achieve a safer outcome for the business.
Yeah, okay. Because I suppose, again, like we're sort of coming back to that area of there's a high level of creativity that comes with what you're doing when, perhaps wrongly people assume that it could be very, boxed in and it's, here's a checklist and here's, criteria you got to follow. Like, but you obviously say it as a different way, right?
Yeah. So I did a lot of reading when I was younger. Yeah. Even things like reading some of the classics, like the Jane Austen classics. I know that there's not a great deal of risk, and I think there's more risk on reputation of reading those books in public sometimes that people say. But even reading books of that vintage back in the 1700s, 1800s, and having a look at how people did things back then. And, in that time, the sheer risk was, for example, somebody not getting married at a particular age. And if they were a certain age, they'd be criticised by people who were their elders and people who were above them in the generation above, etc. So you'd look at that as a risk, and then you'd read that, and then you'd go and read something like, for example, J.R. Tolkien's work, and you'd read that and have a look at, one one entity going to drop a ring in a volcano. It doesn't seem like much, but then that book is just full of risk all the way through. So you read that and you start thinking about how you would have done it. And this is where the creativity comes in, how you would have done it, what could have been done differently, and you start criticizing the book like that. And there was a point where I actually did not want to read Lord of the Rings for a very long time because sitting there going, it could have been done like this. Why did I read thousands of pages when I could have read 50 pages? So become critical like that. But then you come back later on as a more mature person, read the book again and say, okay, I understand why that happened. And then you have a different perspective on the risk as well as you mature too.
Yeah, yeah. And does that also in turn give you an understanding, like, bringing it into what you do now for work, how, clients you work with and the people within organizations, how, problems could go wrong, or they might make decisions that even though you might not make it, with the understanding you have, like they're their own entity and they have their own autonomy. Like, do you has that given you an appreciation of, I guess, the risks that are involved with different people's decision making?
Yeah. So we're all different personalities, and one of the biggest issues with cybersecurity is the fact that human beings are working with technology. Technology is static. Even AI, to a certain degree, is static, and it has an off button. Humans don't have an off button. We have an expiry date, but not an off button. And the very important thing is we're living, breathing, we make crappy decisions about things, we're emotional. And this is where cyber is a really, really interesting place because the way one person thinks about something will be completely different than someone else. It's not like the military going to war. It's not like a mining company digging ore out of the ground. This is very, very agile and very dynamic, and you will never get the same story from two different people. And that's what's amazing about it.
Yeah, well, I want to dive a bit deeper into that because one of the things I wanted to ask you is there's, in the world of cybersecurity, there is a strong focus, at least from a broader point of view on the tech side of things. But what I, speaking to you, what I've I wouldn't say realized, but what I've kind of opened my mind to, and what I love hearing about, and the interesting part for me is the huge human element and sort of thinking outside the box. I guess could you explain like some of the common risks that people should be aware of um when it comes to the the human side of cybersecurity?
So, just to track back very quickly, so when you think of a machine, when you get a machine, you get a configured machine. It has a static configuration on it. You don't change that. But when you think of a human coming in, okay, and you onboard them and you give them the same training as somebody else, everybody's got different levels of understanding. So the first issue is different levels of understanding. How do you educate everybody to get them on the same page for everything? So there's one of the biggest issues to deal with that. The next thing is you come into the organization, are you doing really good background checks on people? Those background checks, now somebody may come into the organization, you may find them out within the first week that they're not really good. And then you've got somebody comes in the organization 10 years down the track, has been there for 10 years intentionally, and they could be a state-based actor from another country who are there to steal your secrets. So they do that over 10 years, exfiltrate information. So these are the real world problems that you're having in there. We try to alleviate that with security awareness training and all that type of thing, but I don't believe security awareness training actually works because everybody's different, the message is different. What I think we need to do is we have policy. You invent a policy for the business that basically says what you can and can't do, and basically that's in a dictatorial way, it's got to be pushed onto people to say, if you do these and you break these are the consequences. It's back to the old days of when what they used to call the wooden spoon factor. Mum tells you don't put your hand on the stove, you put your hand on the stove, well, you know the consequences when that happens. And I think we've got to go back to that now. We can't be, I don't think, caring a lot too much for people's feelings around it, especially when you've got systems that are going to affect human life. You've got a safety system. If you switch that button off, someone's going to get hurt, so don't switch that button off. And I think it's got to be very black and white like that. And I don't really think we need to explain the why, except for someone is going to lose their life. Just do that, get on with your job. I think these days we're flooding too much, and another vulnerability is we're flooding too much information into people's heads that they really don't need to know. So then they become overwhelmed, and there's too much information, then they start inventing what they can and can't do. And it's just the nature of the beast with the human beings is that you'll start inventing things to do. I can go on for hours about this because the psychology element is very big here. And then you've got the different aspects of human behavior. So you've got narcissism and various other things that can lead into bigger problems in the business where somebody will think they're the only person and the world centers around them, and they're going to do things because they think it's in everyone else's best interest, but it's more self-centered for their personal gain in the business. And then they go and act on that as well, and then that becomes a problem for everybody else. So these are some of the issues within the businesses that you will see.
Yeah, okay. And I want to focus on you were saying how, because there is such a flood of information, individuals will focus on and invent. You were saying like sort of invent sort of areas that are important. Is that a case of because there's so much information, they decide in their mind, okay, these are the ones that really need to focus on, and these ones aren't so important? And is the problem again, like, does it need to be clear of like, okay, if it's, just arbitrarily like these 5 things, like you cannot, these are like must, and then you kind of not eliminate the other unnecessary things, but there's a top down approach of saying these are the things that are must, and these are the things that are, I wouldn't say nice to have, but are less risk orientated.
Yeah. So there's different aspects. So the way you look at a policy in a business is you have overarching claims to say, look before you leap. And look before you leap is quite broad. But then look before you leap can say the whole aspect of the airport, if you see something, report it. So it starts becoming more fine-grained. If you see a bag, report it. If you see a brown bag that's yay big and so big, report it, but report it to this person. And then if you see a smaller bag that looks like this. So the aspect is, yes, there are a lot of areas where there are musts, then they become shoulds, and then you may have the maybes after that. But it's very important that if your business and you're passionate about protecting an aspect of your business and you understand what have you got to lose and who's going to do it, how they're going to do it, etc., your policy should be reflective of that to say that these are the musts. So in order to protect my business after a risk assessment, I've assessed these, this is what's important to me, this is what we must protect and how we must do it. The shalls, I don't really believe in policy there should be any shall language or there should be any maybes and shoulds and all that. The policy should dictate what you should be doing, full stop, and tell you how you act. Anything out of that is at a discretion because there's a level of risk that if that discretion is taken, it's not really going to hurt the business. But the policy should be driven about whatever's going to hurt the business, this is how we have to act for that, and then anything after that is a nice to have.
Yeah, yeah, and then I guess highlighting, like you said, those areas where if it's like a safety or life and death kind of situation. I suppose in the same way, if you're in working in like a factory or something, and there's a big red sign, it's like do not press this. Do not, like, is it that kind of little same kind of level of awareness that people need to be operating at?
Absolutely. So you will look at aspects of do not say if you have knives in the business, we'll employ a professional sharpener to sharpen. So don't sharpen knives in the business. So don't bring sharpeners in. So there could be policies that say that. And then later on, if you do prick your finger or something out of an accident, it's not a big deal. It's one of those discretionary things. Okay, you have a first aid officer, you put a Band-Aid on, go to the doctor, get it checked out. But the thing is, don't have sharpeners there because those sharpeners require force with the hand to do it. And someone's conducted a risk assessment around, okay, if somebody actually uses this sharpener, there's a chance the whole finger will come off if that's the case. So there's doing that risk assessment saying, don't do these things. Yes, you're allowed to use knives at your discretion for what they're intended to do is to cut food and whatnot, but please don't use it to pop balloons and please don't use it for that. But as an adult, there's a level of discretion we have to go through with that, but it's very important that the things where someone is really going to get harmed, that's where we have to really focus on.
Yeah. Okay. Given your expertise in this area, Tom, of risk assessment and threat modeling, looking towards the future and including some of the tech we have available and the proliferation of AI and things like that, could you give us a sense of in your mind, I suppose, future risks that are evolving ahead of us?
So no doubt AI is probably one of the biggest. So you've got your chat GPTs, your language models and various aspects like that. So one of the biggest risks now is the adoption of this and the responsible use of it. Like when Facebook came out, everybody got on Facebook, regardless of that, shared their life out, but now we're crying privacy and it's too late for that. With AI, we have an opportunity now to actually start doing it responsibly before we start taking it, because if you look at the ChatGPT model, it's grown beyond anything, and we haven't even started with much yet. And the thing is, it's already starting to crunch data, do things. People have put even private documents and all that type of thing in there. So it's not being used as responsibly as it should. So biggest risk is going to be responsible use around AI. But then what do you feed it and how are you going to interpret what's coming back from it? Is it going to be true? So the risk is being able to know whether you're being fed garbage back or actual real information back. Another very big risk is the quantum space. So quantum computing is a real thing. Quantum computing is speeding up the process of being able to break encryption, which is used to protect your communication from A to B. It's being used to conduct bigger thought process in a short period of time. And the risks around that is it's very, very fast. So if if one of we call a threat actor gets their hands on quantum computing and be able to use it, what are they going to do bad with it? How do they weaponize that? And if it's working much faster than what humans can, well, we've got a problem there. So that's one of the biggest other risks is quantum and AI. Combine those together and we've got a big problem.
Yeah. Okay. And just on the AI piece, because you touched on it, like the, I guess the collection of data and how that is being utilized broadly. Could you touch on that a little bit more, as far as the risks associated with sharing of data and how like maintaining and protecting that data? Like you said, like some people are putting up sensitive documents and etc. Things like that. Could you touch on that a little bit? Yeah.
So, for example, we've heard of cases in other countries where a legal document, now, terms and conditions in a legal document don't mean much until they're actually applied to a company name and a company director and all that, and then it becomes identified. But if it's not identified, the terms and conditions, if they don't name anything, don't really mean much. There are whole contracts with the names of the directors and they've been put in there and asking, say, for example, ChatGPT, write this better for me. So you look at that and go, wow, okay. It retains a copy of that because it's just gone through a learning module to learn about your document, and it will retain that learning. So if somebody else goes and puts a very similar document, it will know in terms of, okay, I've had this other document from that and previous experience. This is what your document should look like. Now, if you keep 100, 200 people, 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people start doing that, then you've also developed now a legal department almost within the AI on commercial law, on terms and conditions of a contract. But how do you know what's right and wrong with that? And this is the issue: is yes, you fed it, and it's got private information, and it's got names of directors and things like that. The biggest issue is that it's actually connected to the internet as well, and it's dragging information from search engines like Bing and Google and all that. Drags the information in and then conducts an association. So if it can conduct an association and start doing what we call open source intelligence, it's starting to get a bigger picture of things. So instead of just looking at contract law, it's going out and having a look at, okay, this person's on LinkedIn, this person's on Facebook, they've got 1 billion articles that they've published about a certain topic area. So the AI is starting to become smarter and smarter from that process. And that's where we've got an issue now, is because we've basically let the cat out of the bag. How do you lock it away now?
Yeah. Okay. And that goes back to what you're saying before, the trustworthiness of what that information being fed back to you is now in jeopardy, because you can't really be sure of where it's coming from and all the different types of sources
Absolutely.
it's taking on, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And we've had in our business, we're of a and I'd like to say this in a very nice way, we're of a vintage where we're very old school. We did things the old way. I mean, we still use pen and paper in our business. We still use whiteboards and things like that. We haven't fully digitized the business. But then you bring somebody of a generation under us who is basically born with a mobile phone in their hand, and then ask them to show you ChatGPT and the things that can be done beyond what even our thinking is. And watching what it can do is just amazing. It's not about what you can find, it's about how you train it to give you what you want, especially when there's things that are bad that you don't want ChatGPT telling you about, but you can train it to give you that information over time. And that's what's also scary, is that you've got a language model and the younger generation who potentially may not be as responsible. And I mean, some of us in the older generation are irresponsible when we do things, but if you haven't had exposure to what real responsible thinking is around information, and you just start doing things like that, then again you're training it to do other things as well. So then it starts to come along and start saying, okay, what else bad can I do from this?
Yeah. Okay. And that's the learning aspect to it as well. Okay. Yeah, I want to go back to we've talked a lot about risk, but one thing we spoke about when we last caught up, Tom, was transforming or turning risk into opportunities, because there is a positive side to it, and that's obviously why organizations and companies choose to work with you. Could you explain how that process works and how you look at that?
Absolutely. So with any risk assessment, there's a remediation plan, and the remediation plan by itself is just a list of things to block gaps. Not very sexy at all. But then when you think of a remediation plan, and for example, if you, for example, have a lot of personally identifiable information, you've identified a risk that you're not protecting that, and your remediation plan is to conduct a privacy impact assessment, while not sexy, the opportunity of a privacy impact assessment for the business is to understand every aspect of personally identifiable information you carry in the business, a business impact assessment on it, how much that data is actually really worth to you. So in the event you are compromised, you will know, for example, pre that, how much insurance you need to take out, what your insurance is going to be worth, what are the real controls to put in place, who's going to be responsible. And those opportunities start to come out of that to understand who's responsible, how are they going to deal with this problem, how are you going to communicate it when it's compromised. So basically now you've got the opportunity where you've developed a very good incident response plan, a disaster recovery plan, and all that opportunity comes out of that, as well as understanding what your information is worth. So then you can go back to your insurance provider and say, this is what I'm worth. So the insurances can be adjusted to make sure you're adequately protected from that. So those are the opportunities that come out of that. Sometimes you'll have a look at a risk, and risk is not really worth fixing, because if something happens, it's nothing going to lose. So why are you spending $20,000 a month on that particular item? And there's an opportunity to save money too, especially when, so sometimes controls get applied and they get forgotten about, and you're paying money, and it's only because somebody's earning money and not actually monitoring it. They're not going to say to you, hey, I'm going to stop expenditure there. Sometimes the risk assessment's needed to justify those, to turn the switch off on certain things. So it can happen in many aspects through that, even to the point of having hundreds of servers in your room. Why do you really need them? If a risk assessment says put them into the cloud, then your electricity bill starts to go down. We've seen examples of organizations where, say for example, crypto miners were used, these are a number of years ago, and the electricity bill was so high, and then someone just made a decision and said no more. All of a sudden the electricity bill got halved through a risk assessment. So there's those opportunities.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to when you're going through that process of discovering like where's the actual loss here, like why are you focusing on this area when you might not need to be doing so, right?
It's even a good test for your vendors. If you're dealing with a vendor, for example, an IT provider or an insurance provider, and you're not getting the love, and through the risk assessment, it comes out that you haven't engaged with them for months, you haven't engaged with your insurance provider for months and all that, then maybe there's the opportunity of, you know what, let's go and force a conversation to happen with someone else, or force a conversation with the existing party to say, why haven't we spoken? Now, those opportunities are very important, because then if the IT provider comes in and says, hey, look, we don't want to manage you anymore, well, there's an opportunity to change and get someone who really does love you. So, there's a million different scenarios through that.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I want to. We're coming to the end of the episode, unfortunately, Tom. But yeah, I know, right? But I do want to ask you, because something I've realized. I can't speak globally. Like, you'd have more experience than me, but at least in Australia and the cybersecurity community, that it's incredibly collaborative. And I guess I wanted to ask you why you think that's an important feature, and why collaboration is important in this community. Yeah.
So I'll talk about it from from a threat intelligence perspective. While in Australia, so we live in a borderless world now. So the only thing that puts up borders is the fact we've got customs areas in Australia that stop people and let people go out and come in, for example, into the country. From a threat intelligence perspective, it's all around the world. But the thing is, in Australia, we can only collect so much intelligence about, for example, the Middle East, without having somebody on the ground over there who's working in the Middle East, who understands the threat landscape there, who can then feed intelligence. And this is where collaboration comes in, is having those right partners and those people in different countries who understand the landscape to feed you intelligence, to also validate what you have. Because you could say, for example, in Qatar, we have a threat actor in the north of Doha who's doing this, but the person on the ground can say, actually, we know who that is. He's a person doing this. He's no longer a threat. So that can then validate that and cut it off the list of being a credible threat, for example. So that's why collaboration is very important, especially when somebody's done something, they want to share it with someone else, because if something works for one person, it may work for 1 million people. So it's about sharing that information, and sharing that as consultants. There's this stigma that consultants don't share, because if they do share, their intellectual property is given away. We're a company that we share everything, because it's very important that people understand that if I can fix this here, you can fix it in a million different places. And this is why we meet with clients. We'll do something with them. We'll generate a blog article, but it will obviously, we take out all the names and anything critical to the business. But there may be a concept that we've just encountered that a community of people need to understand. And that's why a blog article will get written about that, because it's very important to share that information, because it could help other people, and that you can't put a price on when you're helping like that.
Yeah, and I guess like the point you're making is that it's you know, you're helping like a wider community. It's not just the particular company organization you're working with. You solve a problem there, you could potentially be helping another consultant or another company solve a very similar issue just based on the experiences you had. Is
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
And also with blogging and writing articles and communicating that, it also helps us, for example, to interpret the problem in a different way too. And then later on, we may revise that article and put out a revised version of the article, because maybe our thinking was a little bit different at that time. We have a new context. We've seen actually 4 organizations who are having the same problem, who've done 4 different things. That gives us an opportunity then to revise the article. So our articles are not stale. They're always being updated all the time. And we can then put them out to people and say, hey, look, we've updated this, and here's an update about that, and here's what the community are thinking about certain aspects. So yeah, it does provide opportunity. Collaboration is the best way for a community like cyber to be able to start fighting this front. There are other aspects about fighting the front which are very important, but they are probably for another time.
Another episode. Good stuff. Well, look, yeah, like I said, we are coming to the end, Tom. But before we wrap up, how can people find out a bit more about you and a bit more about what you do? Where can we direct them to?
Okay, we have a what my wife likes to conveniently call an online business card. Don't have much of a website, but it's www.shimazaki.io, and you can find me also on LinkedIn. And no doubt, I'm sure you can share the LinkedIn details. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so it's the best place to get a hold of me. And we're not about selling, we're about actually having conversations with people, much like this podcast, where we want to talk to people first, because what people are thinking is completely different sometimes to what's actually really a problem. So we like to get that and extrapolate that first before we even start discussing anything.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, we'll have those links available for the listeners/viewers, depending on how they're consuming this, and direct them your way. But yeah, Thomas, I really want to thank you for coming on. I hope that we do have more episodes in the future, because like you said, we could talk hours on a lot of these different topics and go down a big rabbit hole.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So thanks, Tom.
All right.